Now see it, person to person, a weekly document for television, as told by the faces and voices of people in the news.
In his own statement is saying he told Sepp this after Courtney Love left.
And so there's deception indicated, but was the specific question, did you witness Courtney Love present on that day? Was that very specifically?
No, just the question that I just told you. Did El Duce tell you in the presence of Courtney Love that she'd offered him 50,000 knock for old man? He said yes. Regarding Courtney Love, was she standing there when El Duce told you that she offered him money to kill Kurt Cobain? He said yes. Did you make up a false story about Courtney Love being there in your shop when El Duce told you she'd offered him money to kill her husband? He said no, he didn't make up a false story, and the polygraph indicated deception.
So if you were examined again, the question were actually more along the lines of,
Did he see?
Did he witness her?
He did. Yeah, maybe he did, maybe he didn't.
So that's not clearly established.
No, not by the polygraph. No, not by the polygraph question.
No, I guess we can
look at.
I was the
manager of the rock shop. Afternoon of 1993, December. El Duce dropped by.
Then he says. A white limo
pulled up.
And
that's what he said. 1644 Wilcox was the address.
So the white limo.
Story is
No,
pretending
no, no, that's just what he said
And he
in
did-
pre-test. Apparently, the questions that were to be focused on by whoever commissioned this examination
were those that
were ultimately asked
with the polygraph
attached.
In other words, that
question formulation was somehow directed by whoever, Tom Grant or whoever commissioned this examination.
Is it fairly evident that it was the hard copy TV program? I guess that's the story pretty consistently.
It seems that.
Yeah. Well, I guess for the sake of brevity here and getting something very usable on tape, I guess Mr. Sepegian's contribution to this can sort of be capsulized in as much as he did not test truthfully. However, he was not asked the simplest of questions.
Whether or not Courtney Love was present that day at that time.
No, he was not asked.
No, he was not asked that question.
And so, well, if we could just establish at this moment, then what were the questions in the test that Mr. Sepegian failed on?
Sure.
Mr. Sepegian
was asked three relevant questions.
The first one being,
did El Duce tell you, in the presence of Courtney Love,
that she'd
offered him $50,000 to knock off her old man? He answered yes.
He was asked
regarding Courtney Love, was she standing there when El Duce told you that she offered him money to kill Kurt Cobain? He answered yes. And he was asked, did you make up a false story about Courtney Love being there in your shop when El Duce told you she'd offered him money to kill her husband? And he said no, that he did not make up a false story. The polygraph results indicate deception, with a probability of deception of greater than 99% in regards to Mr. Sepegian's answers to those three relevant questions. So at least from this examination,
it would appear
that Sepegian could not corroborate
El
Duce's statement about what happened in front of Sepegian. We do not know from this examination whether Sepegian could corroborate the fact that Courtney Love was in fact there that day at that time, because those questions were never asked. Now we can go to El Duce's examination and the relevant questions that were asked of him on March 6th
of
of 1996.
El Duce
or Eldon Hoke was asked regarding Courtney Love, did she ask you to kill Kurt Cobain? He said yes. Did Courtney Love ask you to kill Kurt Cobain? He said yes. That's the same question asked a different way. And were you offered $50,000 by Courtney Love to kill Kurt Cobain? He said yes. And the polygraph score was no deception indicated, with a probability of deception of less than 1%. Now the only caveat would be that when Eldon Hoke or El Duce was tested, he said, quote, I didn't know if she was playing a prank, end quote, but he did run truthful on his statements.
Now the question about whether or not it was a prank, was that in a pre-interview session, or was that one of the very specific questions that he was tested on?
No, that was during the pre-interview when we were formulating the questions.
And so working with that independent television program, you drew it down to a set of three questions for each person examined.
That's correct. Each person was asked three relevant questions.
And so this would appear to establish beyond reasonable doubt that this verbal exchange occurred between these two persons, Eldon Hoke and Courtney Love. And in that verbal interaction, there was a proposition, serious or otherwise, to murder Kurt Cobain for profit or money on the part of Eldon Hoke.
Well, the only thing that we could question here is the terminology of the verbiage beyond a reasonable doubt. What we have here is a scoring done by an algorithm developed at Johns Hopkins University Applied Physics Laboratory, which indicates that there was no deception indicated, with a probability of deception of less than 1% when El Duce or Eldon Hoke answered those three relevant questions.
And there have been several magazine articles written about this incident where apparently Courtney Love propositioned Eldon Hoke to kill her husband, Kurt Cobain. And there are various colorful aspects to the way the story is told. What you read before we turned our cameras on here in terms of the pre-interview sort of established the psychological demeanor of Eldon Hoke, El Duce for your polygraph examination in 1996. That contains colorful language, specifically she wanted me to blow his head off, as I recall from the reading of the notes.
Yes, those were things that were said by El Duce during the pretest interview when I asked him to give me a narrative on what happened that day that he said Courtney Love appeared in Hollywood and had a conversation with him, and then I made notes about his statements. Some of those statements were ultimately polygraphed upon.
And those tend to support precisely the version of the story that we've heard in various press sources, which Eldon Hoke was in or around the vicinity of the rock shop on Cox Avenue. Courtney Love. Does your narrative include the presence of a limousine or a white limousine?
That was stated by Eldon Hoke. It was not polygraphed on, but it was stated by Eldon that she appeared in a white limo.
And so, of course, in the direct vicinity of the rock shop where Eldon Hoke spent a lot of time. And then again, both your examination questions and the pre-interview notes tend to spell out that there was a very specific discussion about money for the act of killing Kurt Cobain.
One of the relevant questions was directed towards that premise. And once again, the polygraph indicates that he was telling the truth when he stated that he had been offered $50,000. But what we have to go back to is his comment in pretest about whether he wondered if she was playing a prank.
Well, in any case, it must have appeared very strange to him that a highly successful musician with perhaps millions of dollars of assets would appear more or less on his doorstep to ask him to commit this extremely unusual and obviously extremely illegal act upon her husband. And so the pre-interview is something that occurs not days before, but typically minutes before one enters the polygraph.
Normally, the pretest interview lasts somewhere between 30 and 45 minutes. And during that period, rapport is developed with the person. A determination is made as to whether they are in fact polygraphable, and their side of the story comes out so that the relevant questions can be formulated.
And so I would imagine that if a person, say for instance, Eldon Hoke had this experience, but he wanted to embellish it by adding details about a white limousine and she wanted me to blow his head off, all of these colorful things that might make it more interesting to people in the press. If a person were to begin a session with you by making deceptive statements around the questions that would be asked, does that tend to throw off or spoil the results of the polygraph on the specific question?
No, because the test is really conducted on the bottom line. And it's those bottom line questions that we make a determination about, not the peripheral information.
And so, but there is a factor in the polygraph examination where some people get very nervous about the presence of the examiner and obviously the machinery, and if they come into a polygraph trying to embellish their story in the pre-interview, will that sometimes, could that conceivably throw off the actual testing questions because they're in a state of agitation about having been deceptive in the pre-interview?
Well, that's interesting, but that's probably not what happens because the questions are reviewed word for word, and the person is told that there are no other questions that will be asked other than those that are reviewed with the subject. So whatever nonsense they may have been involved in their discussion about peripheral matters really is not the focus of the examination.
So in terms of details like blowing his head off or a white limousine, you would say that the fact of a successful, truthful examination does not necessarily prove those pre-test statements one way or another.
That's correct. We don't have any knowledge about the veracity of the pre-test statements other than those which are reduced to polygraph questions.
And was there any discussion of what made it into one magazine article, which is Sepegian getting a phone call, Eldon Hoke's friend Sepegian, who ran the rock shop, a phone call very shortly before Kurt Cobain's death, Courtney Love calling the rock shop looking for Sepegian?
I don't have any polygraph information that relates to that.
And the reason that Eldon Hoke's friend failed is that he did not, there was an element of deception involved, and that would tend to indicate in your testing, any deception would tend to invalidate the results of other questions, or is it in fact the case that there were 3 questions put to Sepegian and he attested untruthfully on all 3?
He was untruthful based on the polygraph results on all 3 of those questions. And then, of course, we have the further corroboration in my notes, which indicates that Eldon Hoke said that Sepegian was not present at the time Courtney Love purportedly made the statements to Eldon Hoke. So here we have Eldon Hoke, who does not corroborate Sepegian's position, which ultimately was found to be deceptive.
And you indicated that the pre-testing interview session can take 30 to 45 minutes.
It can take an hour or 2, depending on the complexity. If you're dealing with a money laundering case and it goes over a period of 6 or 7 years, you may spend a couple of hours in the pre-test interview to sort out the facts.
And so in an examination like the one you did of Eldon Hoke, where there were 3 very specific, very relevant questions put to him, would you guess that there was a session establishing that there was a pre-interview of 30 to 45 minutes?
I didn't check the time element, but that would be normal.
And that's to establish the report,
and develop the case information, clarify the issues.
And Was there a media person like the hard copy television program that was helping to formulate the questions that were ultimately put to
That's
him?
where I
Well,
believe
that's where
our marching orders came from.
The examination was commissioned by
someone at
hard copy, I believe.
So
So
you work with them,
you
they
work
have
with them,
suggestions,
they have
and then obviously
suggestions, and then obviously you would have
final approval as the examiner as to whether you feel that those are appropriate and well-phrased questions.
Correct. They tell you
Correct.
the
They
issues
tell you
that
the
they
issues
want to
that they want to explore,
and those may
and
ultimately
those may ultimately wind up as the relevant
questions.
questions.
And now, are there people who can deceive the equipment and software setups that you have now? Is it possible to deceive a polygraph in your office?
Oh, I think that
Polygraph is not infallible.
I don't think we've ever said that it was infallible. If we look for validity in the 90 percentile, let's say just 92%, then that leaves 8% for false positives, false negatives, and inconclusive examinations. Today we can go to the internet and we
try to learn
countermeasures, and those fail miserably most of the time
because the person trying to employ those countermeasures is not sophisticated. It's not like being a spy and practicing for 5 or 6 years
so that you can come
into the intelligence community and beat their polygraph test.
I didn't see any
signs of countermeasures in these examinations, and obviously Sapedra wasn't practicing countermeasures because he failed his test.
So there's really absolutely no application of countermeasures such as drugs or other techniques that were used by Eldon Hoke.
I didn't see any countermeasures employed, and drugs would not be an appropriate countermeasure because drugs have little effect on polygraph tests.
So if people have the impression that you go on the internet and see a website that says take this pill, and you're guaranteed almost entirely to pass that polygraph, that's absolutely not correct.
What happens is most of the time they fail miserably in attempting those countermeasures, and because those countermeasures are discerned by the examiner immediately being deceptive. Well, why would they try these countermeasures?
And in the process of examining someone in, say, a series of three questions, three relevant questions, you do ask the questions more than once.
Normally, at least, well, by law in some states, 3 charts must be collected. In the profession, at least 2 charts are collected. So in these examinations, to make sure that we were in conformance with anybody that would try to fall with the examination, we always run at least 3 charts. So 3 charts, the 3 relevant questions means 9 asking and answer of those questions.
And so that occurs, let's say 9 questions would that occur over the space, would you say 10 minutes, 20 minutes?
Well, each chart takes about 5 minutes, so the person is attached to the polygraph for 3 5-minute charts plus the intervening period. So they're actually attached to the instrument about 15 or 18 minutes.
And obviously, if there were any indication of countermeasures or other techniques or other problems such as alcohol intoxication on the part of Eldon Hoke, you could have a drinking problem, that would spoil the examination. If you sense any countermeasures, including alcohol, present at the time of attempting to do an examination, that would invalidate it.
If the as an example, the same thing we have with drunk driving or driving under the influence. Some people have a couple of drinks and they go out and they drive. Then the question is, in what period of time did they have those drinks? What was their body weight? What was the effect of the drink blood alcohol 0.08. All of these kinds of things could be applied to polygraph. And you could say, well, certainly somebody could have a drink, and it would not affect the results of the examination. Whereas if they came in drunk, and we're not focusing, then they wouldn't be tested, and that would take care of that.
But in the case of Eldon Hoke, who is known sort of a part of his stage presence to be a hard drinker, and he did actually have a drinking problem throughout much of his life. If anyone has the idea that Eldon Hoke was an alcoholic, he could just take a few gulps of whiskey, come in here and to see polygraphs, they would be absolutely correct.
That's right. They would be mistaken.
So even a person who feels that they can use alcohol as a device or a tool to be deceptive in their interactions with people because it calms that is not a factor that would carry over the type of polygraph examination.
Well, normally, the polygraph examiner is in juxtaposition with the examinee, and somebody who smells of alcohol or is under the influence is going to appear to be under the influence. And most examiners have backgrounds in law enforcement, and they're certainly familiar with people who are under the influence and the objective and subjective symptoms of those things. But Eldon Hoke was polygraphable at the time he was tested.
And what are the main points that you cover in the pre-interview that define someone as polygraphable?
Well, you have to realize that examiners have been in this business for various lengths of time. I stopped counting at 30,000 polygraph examinations, and probably I'm quite expert at determining quickly whether someone is polygraphable or not.
And as the profession defines it, that would mean no obvious intoxication of any time. Are there other factors like extreme agitation?
There are myriad factors that come into play when you make that determination, but simple things like drug ingestion does not vitiate a polygraph test. In fact, a study was done down in San Diego by Charles Hess, where they went into a halfway house and they polygraphed a number of people who were high on heroin, and the validity was better than it was with the normal affected person in the public. So drugs don't really affect polygraph examinations because to pass the test, there must be a presence of reaction on certain questions and of lack of reaction on others. And there's no drug that I'm aware of that can selectively cause a reaction on one question and dampen a reaction on another. The whole chart is going to be sedated or elevated and therefore either readable or not.
And if I could just ask you to with a slightly different adjustment in my camera here to cover the very basics of what we're discussing here, which is in fact I could kind of get out of your way and just like you said that in March of 1996. This is what conducted your professional activity.
Well, in March of 1996, two polygraph examinations bearing on this matter were conducted. One examination was of Eldon Hoke, known as El Duce, and he was asked, while attached to the polygraph, regarding Courtney Love, did she ask you to kill Kurt Cobain? He said yes. Did Courtney Love ask you to kill Kurt Cobain? He said yes. And were you offered $50,000 by Courtney Love to kill Kurt Cobain? He said yes, and that examination was scored by an algorithm developed at Johns Hopkins University Applied Physics Laboratory, and the conclusion was that no deception was indicated. There was a probability of deception of less than 1%. And to be completely fair, we must indicate that during the pre-test interview, Eldon Hoke said that he was not sure whether or not, or specifically he said, quote, I didn't know if she, referring to Courtney Love, was playing a prank, end quote. A second examination was conducted in regards to this matter of a person by the name of Sepigian, who alleged that he was standing by when Eldon Hoke and Courtney Love had an interaction at a rock shop in Hollywood, and he was found to be deceptive when he made those statements, attempting to corroborate Eldon Hoke's position. Eldon Hoke obviously didn't need corroboration because his polygraph examination was truthful. So Sepigian's position may well be moot because Eldon Hoke was independently examined.
And essentially the problem with the Sepigian examination is that even if Sepigian saw Courtney Love speaking to Eldon Hoke, your question in the examination covered very specifically the point as to whether he heard the proposition to kill Kurt Cobain, and he said yes, and apparently that was deception.
That's exactly right. We did not ask Sepigian whether Courtney Love was at that location at that day at that time.
And subsequently in the last 4 years, have you had any reason to believe that anything in the course of this examination would compromise its result? That is specifically the Eldon Hoke examination.
No, the examination stands as it was when it was conducted, and there's nothing wrong with that examination.
Typically in the field of polygraph, when someone tests truthfully in a matter of, say, murder for hire, do the police authorities often view this as probable cause for the initiation of further investigation or of a reopening of an investigation?
Well, that's really up to the individual police agency. As an example, it's my understanding that in Israel, failing a polygraph test is probable cause to be taken into custody and held for a short period of time, whereas other countries, other police agencies may place differing weights on the results of the examination. Some may, as an example with the Boulder Police Department and the Ramsey matter, say, well, it doesn't matter at all. We're going ahead with our umbrella of suspicion on the Ramseys, instead of taking the more sensible approach, which is to work harder to find the real killer. So it's up to the individual agency and its general manager.
And so actually you're offering your opinion, which has been in the national news a great deal lately, which is that your examination of the Ramseys in the John Benet Ramsey case was, in your view anyway, exculpatory, that it freed them from suspicion.
The polygraph examinations that they both took, and there were 5 examinations in number, were all truthful, and those examinations were quality controlled by a man who is regaled as being one of the fathers of polygraph, Cleve Baxter. He independently corroborated those findings, so I certainly have nothing but complete confidence in the fact that the polygraph examinations exculpated the Ramseys.
And again, to be perfectly clear, that's the examination that you conducted in recent months.
Yes, in the year 2000.
And you in fact, if the press is correct on this, have been an instructor for an advanced polygraph course for the FBI.
That's correct.
So was that locally or in Quantico, Virginia?
And that was in Quantico. And of course, I'm the past president of the American Polygraph Association, and I've been conducting polygraphs since 1968.
And I think you mentioned earlier in our conversation over 30,000 examinations.
I stopped counting at 30,000.
And out of curiosity, what year was that in?
Well, I started
in 1968 in polygraph, and we're in the year 2000, so I've been doing this for 32 years.
When was the 30,000 in the 80s?
I'd have to go back and look at the record.
In any case, the veteran has over 30,000 examinations, and if you were to put a bottom line on how many of them are spoiled by extraneous factors that the polygraph examiner did not anticipate at the time of the examination, how often, if ever, does that happen?
You could probably go around 2%. That would be those inconclusive or no opinion examinations, which could come from many reasons.
But you're saying not extraneous factors well after the fact. You're saying at the time of examination.
That's correct.
The examiner has to look at the results and say, as the examiner, I'm declaring this inconclusive.
Yes,
and governmental agencies run around 2%. Some agencies run as high as 6% of inconclusive or no opinion examinations. But where examination opinions are rendered, then we have the validity of 92-94%.
You're saying when they're rendered the average score?
No, I'm saying that false positives and false negatives, an incorrect call, happens somewhere around 6% of the time. 94% of the time, the result is accurate.
In other words,
the validity of the technique is around 94%.
And would you say that the rate of the validity of the technique is higher when someone scores according to the Johns Hopkins algorithm in the 99th percentile?
That algorithm is used to corroborate the hand scoring done by the polygraph examiner, and the government still feels that hand scoring takes precedence. And these charts, of course, scored truthful for Eldon Hoke and deceptive for Sapija.
Do you have to? Is there a line that you draw that someone has to be truthful to a 91% degree of probability before you will declare it a truthful examination?
Well, Johns Hopkins has cutoff points.
In
other words, someone could run from 0.01 to 0.09 and be deemed truthful. Someone then from 0.10 to 0.89 would be inconclusive, and from 0.90 to 0.99 be deemed deceptive.
And so obviously the higher that a person scores in, say for instance, the Johns Hopkins software means of scoring truthfulness, really more confidence that the person can have that that's accurate.
Yes, in other words, when they score an examination as no deception indicated and a probability of deception of less than 1%, that's a tremendously high probability that the person's telling the truth.
And is that 99 plus score unusual, or is that fairly typical of people who are simply being very truthful?
Well, that's not easily answered. It's very complex. It has to do with the comparison questions, has to do with the background. There's a lot that goes into it, but the breakpoints are the breakpoints. Someone who scores truthful with probably a deception of less than 1% is in fact deemed to be truthful.
And the means by which you examined Eldon Hoke and others, obviously, in your office. When you say that Eldon Hoke scored with the possibility of deception of less than 1%, in fact, the Johns Hopkins algorithm doesn't break that down into 99.5%, 99.9%, 99% or less than 1% possibility of deception is really the highest score you can get.
Yes.
So obviously your professional opinion is that in terms of truthfulness on the question of did Courtney Love proposition Eldon Hoke to commit the murder of Kurt Cobain for money, your examination shows that Eldon Hoke could not possibly have scored higher in terms of truthfulness.
Eldon Hoke's responses were deemed to be truthful at the highest rating.
The highest possible rating.
Based on the Johns Hopkins algorithm that was extant at that time.
And so when talking about examiners doing hand scoring, I mean, are you a hands-on examiner so that the hand scoring is in fact conducted by you in this and other examinations?
All examinations are hand scored, or should be.
And then your permanent record of this, which you're looking at to some extent here today, you're looking at your notes from the interview, and then would you say that the real true record of the polygraph examination is in a roll of white paper wherein the scoring moment by moment is occurring? I'm not familiar with precisely what you archive.
Well, see, this examination was conducted with computerized equipment. And there's a floppy disk that's used to store the examination. That floppy disk can be put back into the computer, and the examination can be resurrected in its original form. The charts can be printed out and scored.
And so essentially what there is a graph under which I'm going by having seen paper copies, I guess, from the old days before the computer archiving. So what you essentially have is a line graph wherein you see a line go up and down as a person is responding to questions that are typically, in the paper form anyway, notated in pen underneath the moment of the question.
Well, in the old analog instruments, that's exactly what happened. Each parameter was monitored by a moving pen, so that the inhalation and exhalation cycles were inscribed on the moving chart paper. The paper moved along at a constant rate by a machine called a chimograph. And then pens would write on that moving chart paper, and there was one pen for the breathing responses from the upper breathing, another one from the diaphragmatic breathing. There was another pen used to record galvanic skin response or changes in electrical conductivity, and a fourth pen used to record the blood pressure and pulse rate. And those simultaneous recordings would then be scored, and a numerical would come up indicating with certain cutoff points truth or deception.
And so are those still the three classic elements that were scored in the equipment that was used, say, in 1996 or today in the year 2000? Electrical conductivity, the breathing rate, and the blood pressure?
Correct.
So that has not changed. At all.
No.
So more or less the hardware that a person is being measured with in terms of the breathing, electrical conductivity, and blood pressure, those are sort of classic pieces of hardware that are still very much in use today and in use in your office today. And the only thing that's really changed is the software behind testing equipment.
Probably the computerized equipment is today more sensitive than the analog equipment that we used years ago. It has greater sensitivity, so probably we're getting a better, clearer picture of what we had, what we were getting before, when there had to be manual adjustments and you had to keep your eye on the ball, so to speak.
And with
with
the hardware and software setup that's in use, say, in your office today, there's really not any distinct possibility of someone putting their thumb on the scale or in any way maladjusting, misadjusting, or mistakenly adjusting the equipment so that it gives false results.
Well, if you were conducting a quality control of an examination today, and it was a high-profile examination, you would find that today that examination would probably be videotaped, as the Ramsey exams were, or at least audio tape. Then you could actually match the tape with the various adjustments and the equipment as it was being used for the examination, because you would have something to compare it with. Prior to that, you could just look at the charts, and you could evaluate the charts. You could blind score the charts. But if someone had attempted a manipulation, it might not be apparent as it would be if you videotaped an examination today.
But in terms of the theory of detecting when a lie is being uttered, even if the equipment is maladjusted, say, throughout the entirety of the test session, that's going to show up because of the baseline scoring technique that is classic to polygraph examination.
No, I mean, if somebody wanted to fabricate an examination, they could fabricate it. They could say they were asking one question when they in fact were asking another.
Right. And so there is no audio tape. There is no audio tape or videotape of Eldon Hoke, just to solve around that point.
No.
And the likelihood of anyone in the profession, well, scratch that question. But I guess what I was really getting at is there a sensitivity meter that could be adjusted so that I guess, is there an adjustment that you make for a person who is, say for instance, suffering from hypertension? Would their swings in blood pressure be all the more easy to detect, and therefore that a special adjustment has to be made for a person suffering from hypertension?
No, the person is measured in relation to themselves, not in relation to someone else. So you set your own norm into the instrumentation, and that's your norm, not somebody else's norm. And of course, with computerized equipment, any adjustments are marked by the equipment. So someone merely has to look at the computerized examination and can tell if someone made a nefarious adjustment, so to speak.
Or a simple honest mistake that would totally go away.
It would show, because the computer records everything.
And just to be perfectly clear about Eldon Hoke, you did indicate that was the best score that was attainable under the Johns Hopkins algorithms available at that time. Have they made an improvement in software?
I believe they have. They have different. Since then, there have been two different, more modern algorithms developed, which have even higher validity.
But in any case, this was an examination of Eldon Hoke that occurred in 1996, March of 1996. You were utilizing the computer-aided polygraph examination at that time. You were utilizing the Johns Hopkins developed algorithms to establish a level of probability of truthfulness. So really, the equipment and software that Eldon Hoke was tested on in 1996 is almost still state-of-the-art today.
Yes.
The only conceivable improvements being those software improvements, the algorithm improvements that were developed by the very same people at Johns Hopkins.
Yes, there are more examinations in the data used in those later versions, obviously, because you have more and more confirmed examinations to put into the data bank.
But the Eldon Hoke examination was very much the state of the art for 1996, which really is not markedly different from the state of the art in the year 2000.
That's correct.
Well, unless there's something else to add. In terms of the notes that you took in pre-examination, would there be anything else there that you feel would shed light on understanding the truthfulness or validity of statements made by Eldon Hoke?
I don't think so. I reviewed the paperwork, and there's nothing else in there.
But he was rather colorful in terms of communicating to you a rather precise set of circumstances having to do with a limousine, a white limousine rolling up, and the terminology of blowing my husband's head off, and he's an asshole, and I need to. Sorry, the word asshole is in the notes, I think.
It's in the notes.
And below his head off is in the notes.
I
think in the notes it says he's being an asshole.
And I think she refers to him as my old man.
That's what the notes
So
indicate.
we could more or less describe that in terms of a phrase such as, my old man is being an asshole, I need you to blow his head off.
These are things that were said by Eldon Hoke, and those were recorded at the time by me.
And if I'm not mistaken, he did say blow his head off, and in magazine articles he has said blow his head off and make it look like a suicide, but the phraseology make it look like a suicide is not something that actually entered into the
Not in my notes.
Well, again, thank you very much. And I don't know what level of interest LAPD will place in valuing your polygraph examination, but in any case, it exists as a highly interesting piece of evidence.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes. Well, you, Dr. Gelb. And in practice since 1968 in Los Angeles, essentially, or?
Mm-hmm. And around the world. I lived in Spain for 2.5 years.
Uh-huh.
Polygraphed in Spain for 2.5 years.
But obviously, the classic Gelb practice has been here in the city of Los Angeles since '68.
Right.
Did you keep the office open when you were out of the country, or?
I did. I had an associate who conducted the examinations, and then I'd fly in for the heavyweight stuff. I could fly back from Spain anytime the studio allowed me to fly as much as I wanted to.
Oh, so obviously continuously in practice in Los Angeles since 1968.
Right.
And what was the studio you were working for?
Telecinco, Channel 5 in Madrid.
Oh, they required polygraphs on it?
Well, we had a television show called La Máquina de la Verdad, the Machine of Truth.
Ah.
And we polygraphed people from all over the world. We would bring them into Spain and conduct examinations.
Well, obviously people involved in the controversies of the day.
Here's Eldon Hoke's examination.
Hmm.
And here, as an example, is the reaction to the comparison question compared to the relevant question. Did Courtney Love ask you to kill Kurt Cobain? He said yes, and you see there's less reaction here than to the comparison question, indicating that he's being truthful on this question, and he's more uncomfortable with the comparison question. You see that big reaction here, here, and here compared to this, this, and this.
Is there a specific form of the comparison question that you always go to, or?
It's always different based on the background of the person. That's what you're developing in this pre-test interview, which would be the right kind of comparison questions.
But is it often as simple as, is your name
No.
Eleanor Roosevelt?
No. No, it's pretty much sophisticated, much more sophisticated than that.
But in fact, is it the case that you ask someone a baseline question or a comparison question which is guaranteed to...
Here's a comparison question. Here's the relevant question. Baseline arousal, more reactivity than this, more reactivity than this, more reaction on the comparison question, therefore he's being called truthful on the relevant question. See the comparison question? Relevant question, were you offered $50,000 by Courtney Love to kill Kurt Cobain? No reaction when he answered yes, compared to the comparison question, which had greater reaction.
That Kurt Cobain was murdered. There was no blood at the scene of the crime. The person who engineered the fix at the scene was Sergeant Don Cameron, who resigned last year after being called by the King County prosecuting attorney a co-conspirator in the Beauregard Mitchell murder or accidental death at the hands of the bullets of the Seattle police. Donald Cameron, Sergeant Detective, now disgraced and retired, is the person who supervised the Cobain crime scene. So if you're going to agree with these idiots back here who are snickering at me and say, well, no, we'll put the prestige of our police against you, Mr. Investigative Journalist, well, put the prestige of Donald Cameron, disgraced Detective Sergeant, against me any day of the week. All right? The real motivation in paying for the passage of this absurd legislation to put 12-year-olds in smoky bars with drinking adults is to show that Chris Novoselic, head of JAMPAC, president of JAMPAC, president of Nirvana Incorporated, is all hunky-dory with the Seattle City Council and the Seattle City government. Why all he has to do is show up and give them some money, and they pass laws for him. How could this individual be involved in a murder for hire? Eldon Hoke passed a lie detector test in 1996 saying that Courtney Love offered him $50,000 to murder Kurt Cobain. Eldon Hoke passed this lie detector test with one of the leading forensic polygraph examiners in the world, Edward I. Gelb. Okay? You understand?
Your time is up.
So, in fact, Courtney Love, Chris Novoselic's business partner, offered $50,000 to commission the murder of Kurt Cobain, who was the president of Nirvana Incorporated. And now the president of Nirvana Incorporated is sitting in the corner of this room, Chris Novoselic, and he paid for this legislation.
Okay, the next.
Any questions, council members?
Christopher Wall.
I'll tell you what, this is my own personal copy of Dark Victory. If you'd like to borrow it, I'll be happy to loan it to you. It's out of print. Would you like to borrow it, Councilmember Conlon?
No, thank you. Your time is up. Please allow the next person to speak.
Thank you for your time.
What's not funny, though, is that Ed Gelb, one of the world's leading polygraph examiners, and Ed Gelb
I just want to respond to the
has told me...
Councilmember McIver.
Mr. Novoselic, Ed Gelb, a leading polygraph examiner, one of the world's leading authorities in forensic polygraph examination, has said that one of your business partners, Courtney Love, you're assaulting me, miss, knock it off. One of your business partners, Courtney Love, offered Eldon Hoke $50,000 to murder your other business partner, Kurt Cobain. Hands off, minor. You're already under investigation for 2 counts of assault. Attorney's office.